What's good, boys? Welcome back to another video. Today, we are going to be talking about the free agent running back market because, quite frankly, everything that we knew about the Dynasty running back position went out the window yesterday when running backs were flying off the board with new contracts, veteran running backs at that. So we're going to talk about those landing spots, talk about how we're viewing these players in Dynasty Fantasy Football, and kind of talk about some of the repercussions of where these guys have landed. So without wasting any more time, let's hop into today's video. But first, we got to tuck those shirts in. All right, so the first running back we're going to be talking about is going to be Saquon Barkley. He's 27 years old, going in the 6th round of your Dynasty Fantasy Football startups, and he just signed a 3-year, $37.75 million deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. And Saquon's coming off of a 2023 season here where he battled some ankle injuries. He also battled some of these elbow injuries. They kept him out of a couple games, but nothing that we were going to be too worried about because it was only a few. But he did post a stat line this year of 1,242 total yards and 10 total touchdowns. This was good for an average of 15.9 fantasy points per game, and that was good for the 9th overall running back in the NFL for fantasy football purposes this year. So a very good fantasy football season from Saquon Barkley, despite the bad offense that they had there in New York. And Saquon Barkley is going to be going over there to the Philadelphia Eagles. I think he's going to be running behind an upgraded offensive line, even despite the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be losing Jason Kelce. I think this offensive line is going to be much better and should help boost the rushing metrics for Saquon Barkley. I also expect those touchdown numbers to come up that he was posting in New York, especially now that he's in Philadelphia. We think this is a better offense. We know this is a better offense. So I expect those touchdown numbers to come up while he's spending time here. And all in all, I think this was a very solid signing for Saquon Barkley's Dynasty Fantasy Football outlook. I think we should view him as a low-end Dynasty RB1 for probably the remainder of his career here in Philadelphia, as long as he's healthy, as long as he's not, hitting the running back age cliff. As long as all of those things check out, he should post very good numbers in this offense, and I don't expect that to change. This is a great landing spot for Saquon Barkley. Now, moving on to our second running back, we are going to be talking about Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs is 26 years old, going in the 7th round of your Dynasty Fantasy Football startups, and he signed a 4-year deal with the Green Bay Packers for $48 million. Now, just like Saquon, Josh Jacobs missed some time in 2023. He battled a quad injury. It forced him to miss about 4 games of the NFL season, and because of that time that he missed, he did post the worst stat line that he's posted in a few seasons, and he posted 1,101 total yards, 6 touchdowns. It was good for 18th overall from a fantasy points per game standpoint, averaging about 13.9 points. And I'd be lying to you guys if I said there weren't a couple yellow or orange flags for Josh Jacobs right now. When I look at what he did last year and I look at some of the metrics that he was able to post, he had the worst yards per carry numbers that he's had in his entire career. He also saw his yards per touch, his juke rate, and breakaway run rate efficiencies all fall near or out of the top 50 in the NFL. So there are some yellow flags with Josh Jacobs, and that could be because of the injury, that could be because there was a bad offense there in Las Vegas, or that could be signs of an early running back age cliff. There are a couple of these yellow flags with Josh Jacobs, but like I said, I'm not fully ready to make those red flags yet because I do think that there was enough data with the bad offense in Las Vegas that are going to make it to where you can make some of these excuses for why Josh Jacobs had such a bad season. And we also have to account for the fact that Josh Jacobs saw the highest average of defenders in the box for any running back last season. When you look at that, he was number 1. So there are a couple signs that point to him having a bad year for some various reasons. So like I said, not a red flag, but there are some yellow flags. And I do think that this landing spot is going to be good for Josh Jacobs. Obviously, the offense is an upgrade. It is an up-and-coming young Green Bay offense. And I do think that Josh Jacobs should be able to give you some of those high-end running back 2 numbers for at least the next couple seasons while he's playing here in Green Bay. So now we're going to talk about DeAndre Swift. He is 25 years old, going in the 8th round of your Dynasty Fantasy Football startups, and he signed a 3-year, $24 million deal with the Chicago Bears. Now, Swift is coming off of a 2023 season where he played in Philadelphia. He posted 1,263 total yards and had 6 total touchdowns. That was good for an average of 12.5 fantasy points per game, 24th best in the NFL. Now, with DeAndre Swift, he's going to be going to a situation here in Chicago where he is going to be playing behind a worse offensive line than he was playing behind sign in Philadelphia. I think we all can expect the Chicago Bears offense to be worse than what the Philadelphia Eagles is. And despite them being led by what we think is going to be Caleb Williams, I think we can all understand that they probably aren't going to be humming right out of the gate with a rookie quarterback under center. And there is no guarantee that this is a better situation for DeAndre Swift. I also think there's an argument for the fact that the running backs that are going to be in the backfield with DeAndre Swift there in Chicago are better than the competition that he had when he was in Philadelphia. Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert are probably both better than Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott, who are playing there in Philly. And so with that being said, overall, I don't think that this landing spot moves the needle for the way that I'm viewing or the way that I am valuing DeAndre Swift in my Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. So if somebody in your league is letting this landing spot dictate the way that they're viewing DeAndre Swift and they view this as an upgrade, I think this might be a window where we can sell DeAndre Swift and get out of him as a Dynasty Fantasy Football asset, because I just don't think that this is an upgrade for him moving forward. Now, moving on, we're going to be talking about Joe Mixon, who is 27 years old, and he was going to be released by the Cincinnati Bengals, but the Houston Texans heard that. They said, hey, we don't want to let Joe Mixon hit the open market, so they offered a undisclosed pick. Whatever that pick is, we don't know yet, but they offered them a pick. They got a deal done, and Joe Mixon is now a Houston Texan, and he's coming off of a 2023 season here where he posted a stat line of 1,410 total yards, 12 touchdowns, and with those numbers, he was averaging 15.7 fantasy points per game, which was the 11th best in the NFL, so low-end running back one numbers from Joe Mixon in 2023. And quite honestly, Joe Mixon has shown us very little signs of him slowing down. I think this is a guy who is a very high volume type of runner. He gets better the more carries, the more touches that you get him throughout the game. And with Joe Mixon going to the Houston Texans, where we've seen them lean on running backs in the past in Dameon Pierce, we've also seen them lean on Devin Singletary late last year. I definitely expect Joe Mixon to have a heavy workload here in Houston, and this is somebody who I don't think is going to have a lot of competition for touches in the backfield. And with that being said, it's not very often that you have a veteran running back that leaves a situation and goes to somewhere that is equally as good, if not better. And I do think the Houston Texans have the opportunity to give him a very similar situation to what he had in Cincinnati, because they could have him taking more carries than they were giving him in Cincinnati, because we saw Chase Brown being worked in and things like that in Cincinnati in 2023. And so I do think that Joe Mixon should remain in that low-end RB1 territory, maybe even high-end RB2 territory for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams. And this is a guy that I was saying to buy throughout the offseason. It got a little scary there. I'm not going to lie. When they were talking about him being released, it got a little bit scary, but it looks like we avoided a major pitfall, and it does look like Joe Mixon is set to be successful here in Houston for at least the 2024 season. So now we got Tony Pollard, who is 26 years old, being drafted in the 10th round of your Dynasty Fantasy Football startups, and he signed a 3-year, $24 million deal with the Tennessee Titans. Now, Pollard is coming off of a very mediocre 2023 season. It wasn't what we all expected him to be once they gave him the full backfield there in Dallas. He posted a season of 1,316 total yards and 6 touchdowns. That was good for an average of 13.1 fantasy points per game, which was 23rd best in the NFL. So low-end RB2 for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams. But I will say that Pollard's season was not as bad as some people are going to lead you on to believe. He did have the low touchdown numbers. He did have the dip in the YPC that we see, and that is what kind of made it a little bit worse for him on paper. But with that being said, I do think going to Tennessee is going to be a downgrade for Tony Pollard as we viewed him for Dynasty Fantasy Football. This is a situation where he is going to face much tougher competition than he faced when he was in Dallas. And obviously he had the years with Ezekiel Elliott, but we're not talking about those years. We're talking about last year. Tony Pollard had Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn to really compete with. There was really nobody there in that backfield that he was competing with, but now he's going to a backfield that has Tajay Spears, who did look good and was taking some carries away from Derrick Henry. So with that being said, I expect him to take carries away from Tony Pollard. I don't think Tony Pollard is a good enough running back to compete with what Derrick Henry was in Tennessee. And unfortunately for people who have Tajay Spears or really like Tajay Spears as a breakout candidate, I think Tony Pollard is going to limit his upside as well. This is a guy that is going to eat into both of these guys' carries. So it's going to be a kind of bad situation for both running backs in Tennessee. And lastly, we also expect this Tennessee Titans offense to be pretty weak compared to what Tony Pollard was playing with in Dallas. Last year, Dallas's offense was very good. Now he's going to an offense led by Will Levis. There's Treylon Burks, DeAndre Hopkins. There's not a lot of things to like here. New coaching staff. whole bunch of change going on in Tennessee. I think the way that I'm going to be viewing Tony Pollard moving forward is kind of as this low-end RB2 for my Dynasty fantasy football teams, who is going to have a lot of inconsistency to his game because he's competing with a guy like Tajay Spears. Now, next up is going to be Aaron Jones. He's 29 years old, also going in the 10th round of your Dynasty fantasy football startups. And this guy was released by the Green Bay Packers after they signed Josh Jacobs, and shortly after he signed a 1-year, $7 million deal with the Minnesota Vikings. And Jones battled a lot of injury in 2023. He missed 7 games with a knee and a hamstring injury. And because of that, Jones was only able to put together a stat line of 889 total yards and 3 total touchdowns, which was good for an average of 12.3 fantasy points per game. That was 26th in the NFL. Now, despite the age and the injuries, it is kind of surprising that Aaron Jones was efficient as he was, because when you look at what he was doing from a per touch basis, he was 14th in true yards per touch. And more importantly, when you look at the receiving, he was 2nd overall in yards per route run for running backs. So definitely a guy who is going to be very beneficial for the Vikings in the receiving game from the running back position. And when I look at what I think Jones is going to be for the Vikings, he's a guy who seems more like he's going to be a complementary piece to what they have. I think Ty Chandler is going to get more of the early down work, and Aaron Jones will kind of spell him in some of that early down work, but also having Aaron Jones be the primary receiving back in this backfield, that will probably make him the more valuable of the 2 running backs. But I don't think that Aaron Jones is coming into this backfield and going to be a bell cow for the Minnesota Vikings. And in all fairness, I think that's kind of the similar situation that he had when he was there in Green Bay from an opportunity standpoint, spelling with A.J. Dillon. Obviously, there are some question marks about the Minnesota Vikings, who is going to be playing under center after Kirk Cousins left in free agency. So there is going to be some efficiency issues if they don't bring in a very good rookie quarterback. And even if they do bring in a rookie quarterback or move forward with Sam Darnold, there are going to be some efficiency questions, and they probably won't be as good of an offense as the Green Bay Packers were, but probably somebody we should be viewing as a low-end running back too as well, similar to how we're viewing Tony Pollard. And now we move on to our second to last running back. We're going to be talking about Derrick Henry. He is 30 years old, signed a 2-year deal with the Baltimore Ravens for $16 million. And Derrick Henry posted a 2023 season where he went for 1,381 total yards. He had 12 total touchdowns, and that was an average of 14.5 fantasy points per game. This was good for 16th overall at the running back position. And Derrick Henry going to Baltimore is most likely what all of the fantasy football, all of the NFL fans have been begging for. I mean, when you think of a backfield of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, it's just incredible. It sounds so fun to watch, and I think everybody's going to have a lot of fun watching it. But with that being said, I do think that Derrick Henry did regress a little bit in 2023. And when we're looking at him as a dynasty asset and not just a fan of what could happen in this Baltimore backfield, I do think that there are some minor flags that we should be looking at, and maybe looking at this as an opportunity to sell Derrick Henry. Now, Henry did see his fantasy points per game and his rushing attempt numbers regress last year, and we could probably attribute some of that to the addition of Tajay Spears, and like I said, the bad offense that the Tennessee Titans had under Will Levis. And even when we look a little bit deeper, we see that Derrick Henry was 41st in true yards per carry, and also was 41st in yards created per touch. So he lost a little bit of the efficiency that we have seen out of Derrick Henry in the last couple of seasons. And like I said, this is a very good landing spot, a very exciting landing spot for Derrick Henry. It should give him the ability to score 15 or more touchdowns this year in 2024. But just due to his age and some of the dips in efficiency that we saw last season, I do think I would be more than happy to let somebody else in my league experience the Derrick Henry Baltimore Ravens era. And I'd be using this really good narrative for Derrick Henry to potentially be selling him and getting out of this asset at the running back position. And that's why I'd be selling Derrick Henry in this landing spot with the Baltimore Ravens. And now the last player that we're going to be talking about today is going to be Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler is 28 years old. He's going in the 11th round of startups right now, and he signed a 2-year deal with the Washington Commanders. It's worth $8.43 million. And really, Ekeler put together a forgettable 2023 season. It wasn't the best season ever for Austin Ekeler, and really a lot of us were disappointed in the year that he gave us. He posted 1,064 total yards and 6 total touchdowns. He averaged 13.2 fantasy points per game, which was good for the 21st running back in the NFL. So obviously a very significant fall off from the number 1 and the number 2 fantasy points per game numbers that he had been giving us over the last couple of seasons. And Ekeler going to the Washington Commanders reunites him with former head coach Anthony Lynn, but it's really hard for me to look at what Austin Ekeler put on tape in 2023 and not feel like he has hit the running back age cliff. And I think the data really supports that statement. When you look at what Austin Ekeler put together last year, the big thing is he saw a massive regression in touchdowns. He scored 20 touchdowns in 2021, 18 in 2022. And then he posted 6 in 2023. So that was obviously the first major regression. And we know that touchdowns aren't a sticky stat, so it's probably not the greatest of stat to hold on to. But additionally, he did also see his lowest rushing attempts, his lowest rushing yards, lowest receptions, lowest receiving yards since that 2020 season. And he did post the lowest yards per carry of his career. So you put all of that data and you add that to the fact that Washington is going to be starting over from the ground up with a rookie quarterback, and Austin Ekeler is going to be 28, going on to 29 years old. To me, that just sounds like a recipe for disaster, and that's a player that I'm going to be avoiding in my Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. And if for some reason somebody is excited about this, I don't really know why anybody would be, but if somebody is excited about this, I'd be selling Austin Ekeler and I'd be getting out. But all right, guys, that's all we have for you today. So if you did enjoy the video, do us a favor, hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. If you also want to catch some additional Dynasty content, I am always posting Dynasty content over on my channel. You can check me out at the League FFB. That's a place where I post my personal content. So you guys, it would mean a lot if you went over and subscribed to me there. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We're trying to hit 5K on this channel this week. So make sure you do that for us, and more content coming soon. So we'll see you guys on the next one. But until then, peace out.